was a blank slate when we first started. And that was both exciting and also really scary. And our investigations that began with ornithology over in the exhibits museums, anthropology, we went throughout all these museums, and finally ended up at the very end of one day where we'd spent the entire day in collections in paleontology, and I never thought paleontology we'd find anything. I just thought, fossils, are we really going to do anything with them? But we were taken down into this subterranean space, which was just magnificent to my mind. And in the course of that, the people we were talking to, they showed us these replications, this casts of whales they were making, and I found that to be really engaging, and I started to think about the whole idea of replication, and that's really where this show began. This was that subterranean space, and it's this wonderful sort of forgotten place, if you will. I mean, it's not forgotten by the people who work there, but most people don't know that this exists on the campus. And it's just this is a 50-foot, 38 million year old, 38 million year old whale in this case, that is being laid out and cast. And what we did was a way of thinking about this spatially is we actually got access to these replicas, if you will, fake tools, and we just extended this space out into the, extended the space of the photograph out into the actual space of the gallery. So that kind of interaction became really exciting for me, and I think for Amanda as well.
I like too this sort of connection and disconnection, and I see that in your work where there seems to be some connection made that seems very logical and then suddenly illogical.
Right.
Or,
yeah, you go from bones to these tools. You know, you go from 38 million years ago to 500 years ago, and that sort of juxtaposition in time and space is really what this particular show is about. And it relates to my earlier work, but it also takes me to a whole other area. What this entire exhibition is about, and what my work often is about, is the apparatus of the theatricality of display within the museum, and in this case, the Natural History Museum. And I decided that rather than take this out of its protective armature, I decided that I wanted to keep it in the armature and hang it as is, because that kind of indicates where it came from.
Yeah.
And I like that idea, rather than if we just hung it there, it would have been dramatic, but I think this way it comments on the idea of display within the museum context, just as we've done down here with the vitrines or over there, with objects that you wouldn't necessarily expect to see in a vitrine. For me, it was more about how this object became, I mean, it used to be on wheels, so we actually pushed it across campus on wheels. And to bring it here and hang it in its armature was really important to me.
The day of moving that whale, I thought it was magical. This whale being rolled across campus in the middle of the day, and that feeling also that something was brought out into the light.
And that is something that my work is also concerned about, in terms of what I try to give light to something that's been hidden or secreted away. And that's what we were doing in a sense here.
Right.
But not presenting it as you would in, let's say, a natural history museum, but to present it in its artifice, in this case, its armature, that was used to protect it. I felt like it was really important to reveal where it came from, what it came out of, and why it wasn't on display necessarily. And this is the way it looks when it's not on display. And I wanted to just reiterate that and hang it from the ceiling in its armature, as it would be down there in that space.
Right.
Because if we took it out of its armature and hung it from the ceiling, just as it is, it would look like a display in a natural history museum. So it's not so much, I mean, the cast is important to me.
But it's the way that it's framed.
But it's the way that it's framed.
Displayed.
And framing and containers has always been a part of my work. And so this is just an iteration of that. So, for instance, this photograph. This is molds of a mastodon collected by Daniel Fisher. I am interested in these not for the fact that they are molds of a mastodon. I'm interested in these because they look like flesh. They become something different than what they are. They're actually silicon and hard fiberglass. But what for me happens is they become, in the transference of the photograph, they become flesh-like and almost fetishized, if you will, with these, the way that they've been put together with bolts and screws and just kind of this really interesting, strange quality to them that take you out of the realm of mold making for this particular animal, or in this case, a mastodon. But it goes back to this idea of authenticity and what's real and what isn't real and how do we value that. What was interesting for me coming upon these over 100 years later was what was happening in the margins. And you get calendars that talk about the time that it was done, and you get light fixtures and cabinets and books and occasionally a human being and posters from the period. And not only did they have this great quality of just sort of daily life, but they also have this kind of really 20th century, 21st century modernism going on here, which I like that referral, just the way that that object has been isolated. These feel like early collages of Max Ernst or J. DeFeo a little later. I mean, they really have this quality about them that is not of their time, and it's completely accidental. And nobody else at that time would have even, they wouldn't have even thought about these in that regard. And that's what I like, is this kind of layering of interpretation that we bring to it.
I absolutely agree that there's this quality of mark making in them that is reminiscent of expressionism or modern art, and at the same time these small details in the margins for me really bring forward that feeling of us being in the midst of some obsolescence, that you know, this was a layer and now we're an additional layer. It's constantly being reinterpreted, and in the midst of it, we're already in the past. Each image and each idea acted almost like an echo. Sort of reverberated something else that was happening in an image, or this idea of extinction was sort of echoed by some idea of preservation and replication and authenticity. And I feel as if when you come in here, you really get that sense of a conversation happening.
The idea of this show is implied in the first two words in the title, past perfect. And past perfect, it means essentially that it's actually in the past of something else that happened in the past. So that goes back to this idea of this kind of a layering of history. And that's what past perfect translates to. And I really like that idea that it is not only one past, but it's two pasts. And then future tense implies that this will have a life, a proof, or be a proof, or have authenticity at some time in the future.